Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of Stigma. Now, as you know, we've been looking at domestic violence, and today we're going to be concentrating on services available for victims of domestic violence. Women and men who are abused at home need to be in a safe environment. And the panel that we've got with us today will be talking about what does that actually mean for that person. We've got Sarabjit, regular solicitor. I don't need to do any more introductions. We have Paula, you're from the City Council and you're the lead in domestic violence. And we have Inderpal, who works with victims of domestic violence. And I should actually be calling it domestic abuse as opposed to domestic violence because the name has changed. Paula, I wanted to come to you first because you work for the Birmingham City Council, but what is it that you actually do?
Okay, well, I'm the lead for violence against women, and what that means is that I give guidance to the City Council, to the commissioners within the City Council and partner agencies in health and the police about what services are needed, about doing research and understanding of what's the best way to provide those services. I come from a service background myself. I have provided services in refuge on the National Helpline, and so I come with that understanding, and I work very closely with the domestic violence services in the city to make them the best that they are and to get the best that we can. Okay.
Inderpal, I wanted to ask you because when we talk about domestic abuse, and the figure's really shocking, 2 women in the UK are killed a week. But if we look at the worldwide figures, 1 woman is killed every minute. Massive figures. Is that really the picture in the grassroots?
It is. I know it's really shocking, but it actually is the real picture. Because if you think about it, victims don't come forward. So you're not even going to know that they're victims until the police have done an investigation into their murder. Or whether they, like I said, they don't report it, so you're not going to know until they've done an investigation, or a family member or somebody has come forward for that person. But at the end of the day, it's that individual victim's choice on whether they're going to come forward or not. And I think that's what we need to start addressing, is actually helping them come forward.
Sarb, and I know that there's not always statistics available or readily available or show the true reflection in terms of perpetrators, the abusers of the violence that actually end up in court, end up with sentences, or end up, back in the community. What's the picture like from a criminal perspective?
First of all, I've got to point out I normally represent the accused, but what I'm able to do is give you an insight into how it works on the other side, because I have prosecuted in the past. In terms of the courts, numerous cases come to court, but then the number of cases that come to trial, things fall down between the initial accusations and trial, and then once you do get to trial, then again, not all alleged perpetrators of these offences become accused.
Okay. Inderpal, I want to come to you in a typical scenario, because obviously today we're looking at the services that are available. So the scenario is a woman probably has been abused 40, 50 times, picks up the courage to, phone somebody, and it could be possibly a helpline. It could be a gurdwara, it could be a church, it could be a neighbour. What happens once they've made that phone call to a service to say, I am being abused at home?
A DV service, so if they're calling from anywhere. As soon as they pick up that phone and disclose that they are being abused, then a DV service will do what they can to get that individual out of that situation. Okay, it depends on whether the individual wants to come out of the situation. It could be that they just first want advice, and we have a lot of that is first to test the waters, really, because you've got to think about it this way, is that when women, and I think you've discussed it probably in your previous shows as well, is that when women pick up that phone, they don't know what's on the other end. It's because they are so confined and isolated that they only know what the perpetrator is telling them. So when they pick up that phone, we always say one chance to rule an act, that's it. So we've got that one chance to try and get that victim out. And what will happen is we'll explain the services. So there's refuge provision, community support if they're not ready to actually leave yet. That we can help with their children as well, because obviously there's refuges that take children. And we'll explain all that, and then we'll actually help explain to them that we can do a safety plan for them to come out of the property as well, so we can actually assist them, whether we need the police assistance, because in some cases you do need police assistance, depending on if the perpetrator is in the home or not, or if they've got a window where the perpetrator stays out and they're able to get out in there. But that then also depends on whether they've locked the doors or not, and we'll try and do a safety plan with them to get them out of that situation. And then, like I said, depending on what the victim wants, we'll bring them into refuge, we'll settle them in, we'll help them financially with their finances to apply for benefits, so that they can stay at the refuge and they've got some income for them and their children to survive on. We will then do a support plan with them, and it's very personal centred, so it's very much the victim, whether they're ready to do certain things like, have awareness of DV, register with the doctors. It's very simple things that we do with them because they've probably never had that control or able to make those decisions for themselves. So we don't want to control them. That's why it's very personal centred. So like I said, it's very much like it's your time. So when do you feel that you'll be ready to do this? Just if that makes sense. And then like I said, the ball's in their court. They'll register with doctors, dentists, go to their appointments. It could be housing, and then what we'll do is towards the end it will be to look at rehousing them, but in the middle it's a lot of support. Could even help them get into employment as well.
We'll look at that individually, because what I wanted to ask Paula was, it all sounds absolutely fantastic. Does it really work as smoothly as Inderpal is describing?
Well, I think there are some challenges because I think Inderpal's very rightly described the process of refuge, but for many women they're not ready to leave a violent relationship, and they don't feel safe to leave that relationship, and we know that actually the most unsafe time, the time when they're most at risk, is when they leave. So what we should be doing as services is putting wraparound services when we know, in order to protect them. And
I just want to stop you there, because it's quite interesting you're saying that the most vulnerable time or the most risky time is when they actually leave. But many people would assume that when you've left the situation, you're probably quite safe. Why is it such a vulnerable time when they leave?
It's because domestic abuse is about power and control. It's about the abuse of power and control by the abuser. And as soon as the abuser feels that the family is moving away, is breaking that control, and trying to seek help, never mind leaving, then they will try to exert more control, and that's when the worst of things happen. I review all the homicides and the domestic violence homicides in the city, and the majority of those are when somebody's left. So it's quite right that victims feel very unsafe about thinking about leaving. It's quite right that they want to try and think about what's the best way of doing this. How do I bring this relationship to an end in a way that's safe for me and safe for my children? And I think that's when it's really important that they have good advice. And that's when things like helplines, things like group work, things like counselling, family support, all of these things are in place across the city that can support that. We've got a range of really good services in the city, and some of those provide drop-ins and a front door to domestic violence. We're not demanding that victims make those decisions, or women make those decisions. We're saying, right, if you're thinking about this, these are sort of things that might be able to help. See, there's some of the practical issues. We understand that having lived with abuse breaks your confidence, breaks your ability to make decisions or feel that you're going to be able to do this on your own.
So it's not a case of a doctor's surgery where one glove fits everybody.
Absolutely.
Is the service really geared towards an individual's needs?
I think the domestic violence services are absolutely geared to their need, domestic violence victims' needs, and they're the ones that tell us within the statutory sector what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And I think the statutory sector's got a lot to learn. I think across police and health and children's social care, we've still got a great amount to learn in how to walk at the pace of victims that keeps both them and their children safe. And I think sometimes we don't get that right. But my job is to work with those agencies to make sure that they understand that trying to push somebody into doing something which they're not ready or feel able to do is not the right thing, because what you're doing is you're taking control, which is exactly what the abuser's done, and you're not identifying the risks that the victim themselves have understood but may not be able to communicate to you for fear of what you might do. The statutory sector has lots of powers, and so I think there's work to be done, but the absolutely overwhelming message is that victims need to come forward, and with domestic violence services as the first port of call, unless there's an extreme risk, in which case the police have got to be the first port of call, but to talk to the domestic violence services at their own pace, and that's the important bit.
Sara, how easy is it for victims to access services?
I think I come from a different standpoint to obviously the two guests, because they're almost describing a situation where a woman's realised that she needs help and she seeks out the help, whereas my viewpoint is from a woman that's gone through a dangerous or a violent situation and has called the police. And in that kind of situation, there is help for these victims, or alleged victims as we call them, from a defence point of view. So they'll call the police, the alleged perpetrator will be removed from the situation, he'll be taken into police custody, he'll be questioned with regards to the allegations, and a statement will be taken. The perpetrator will then, 9 times out of 10, be put, well, that's a bit of a throw in the air statistic, but be put on bail to keep away. There are occasions where there's no further action taken, the police don't feel that there's enough evidence, but a lot of the time, as a precautionary measure, a lot of time officers will just impose bail conditions even if they don't feel that there is enough time, and the case will then be referred to the Crown Prosecution Service, who make a decision on charge. If there's enough evidence, they'll be charged that night, and they'll perhaps, depending on the violence involved, be taken to court the next morning. So going back to the question that you've asked me, yes, there are amenities and services there available if a woman, or equally a man's, been through a violent situation. The police are quite well versed in how to deal with these situations. And if you do make that 999 call, you will get the help that you need.
Paula, how do you determine what services DV victims need? Is it based on your research? Is it based on statistics that have been put together? Is it based on what agencies are telling you? Or is it actually based on the voice of the person who's, travelling that life?
The challenge of the voice of the person who's been abused is that everybody's voice is different, and the needs of individuals are that indeed that they are individual, but there are commonalities, and the commonalities of need are what we look at when we're determining what services the city needs. And we look at evidence. So we look at the evidence nationally, we look at the evidence internationally, we look at the evidence locally. We listen very hard to those who are closest to domestic violence victims. So we listen very hard to the domestic violence services who tell us, who are our closest thing to the voice of real people. And we put those together.
Do you ever actually listen to the voice of the victims? Do you find yourselves in a situation where you feel, okay, fine, you know what, we've got the service users' point of view, we've got strategically the point of view from politicians, we've got the local, we've got the national, we've got the global view as well, we've got the legal view. The view of the victim, is that really listened to? Are they actually approached and asked, what services would you have liked? What services have you found useful, and what services were impractical for you?
Could I just intervene? Because as a response to that question, I don't think that they are listened to all the time. On a daily basis, I'll be doing a trial or be booked in to do a trial on a domestic violence case, and the victim will turn up to court under police pressure, but they won't want to give evidence. And the situation is, you know, the pressure that's exerted on them, social services will have stepped in, the police will have stepped in, and social services will often make threats like, you know, we've got to consider the welfare of your children. We don't know what's going to happen with your children or if they can remain in your custody. If you don't give evidence, that's the kind of pressure that's exerted on them. Now, for domestic violence victims, I don't think sometimes leaving is not always the best option. No. Maybe it's just the perpetrator needs help. And it's not an ideal situation, but if that perpetrator got the help they needed, maybe it doesn't mean the family has to part. It's not always a solution, but at times I look at cases, it's been a one-off incident, or there's been a couple of incidents, or alcohol's become an issue, and that's why violence has become an issue. So I don't always think the authorities take the right approach, and it's not a tailored approach, it's just a case of let's prosecute.
Paula?
You see, I think there aren't enough prosecutions, you know, and I'm absolutely with you on that we shouldn't be pushing victims into giving evidence and testimony at the when they don't feel they want to, or they don't feel safe to. It's more often, I think, that they don't feel safe to. But I think there are many more opportunities for us to take victimless prosecutions from the evidence that is available. And I'm not sure, as a society, not just Birmingham, but looking wider, that we take all those opportunities, because I think it is for the state and society as a whole to be coming down hard on domestic violence and saying this is all of our business. This is not an individual matter between a couple. This is our business that we will protect. We will demand equality, we will demand respect, and we demand protection for our most vulnerable.
That's all good and well, but meanwhile you've got a victim who's anticipating access to all these wonderful services that have been described, and is actually, like Sarb saying, not getting the service that she needs. Inderpal, why do you think that the services are not always delivering what they're saying on the carton?
If we're looking at regards to the prosecutions, we've had that on numerous occasions where the victim doesn't want to give.
You've spoken yourself about empowering the victim and giving them the choices, but almost again, it's like a second slap on the face. It's a case of, this is what we want you to do. You will go and give evidence. So that again, where's that empowerment?
That's what I mean. Obviously, with the police and the authorities, they use that authority on the victim.
But then, how much role do services take part? Because it's all good and well to say the police are looking for a prosecution, the police are doing this, the courts are doing this. We need more statistics. We need more evidence. We need more of this. Meanwhile, 2 women are still being killed each week. 1 woman every minute, worldwide. So it is an epidemic that's going on. Why is it that the services can't look at what they're supposed to be providing, rather than thinking, okay, fine, you know what, we're going to shift the blame onto the police because they've got a different agenda? Well, everybody has a different agenda in this situation.
Well, we do support the victims through the court process if they have to go and give evidence, and we do stick up for them, and actually sometimes do write, they have to go to their GPs, and we'll support them in that, because some of them aren't physically well enough to go into court, and sometimes mentally aren't well enough to go into court as well. So we do support them. And I always ask the question, well, not just me, but I know that services always ask the question, especially refuge and DV providers will always ask the victim question, do you think you're ready? Do you think you'd be able to do that? But talking on the other hand, there are support agencies like Victim Support where you can put a screen in front if you have to go, because we've had some cases where the police have said we're going to put your warrant.
But the thing is, always said it's an application that you make. You're not always entitled to that support.
But from when I've been working in DV services, and I've always made, we've as an organisation we've made the applications, we've always got them granted. Yes, we have. I know they might not always be granted, but we've always had them.
But a screen is not going to provide that person with safety if they're going through a court process, they're walking out of those court doors, possibly going to a refuge, and people can find ways of finding out where refugees are now anyway. There's a multitude of ways of finding out. In terms of keeping that victim safe, are the services really doing what they're saying? Paula, are they really doing what you guys are saying that they need for these victims?
I think I'm going to distinguish between domestic violence services, those who are specialists, and I think they're absolutely doing the right thing, and that's what we're encouraging, is to make sure victims do connect with the domestic violence services for all the failings that there are in the criminal justice system, and there are plenty. There are failings at each level, at each step along the way. What we do find is where victims are supported by domestic violence services through the courts, that they are more likely to get that protection in court. They are more likely to see themselves as safe, to see themselves as supported, to see themselves as connected, and therefore more likely to want a prosecution where they have been. And to be fair, prosecutions only happen in quite severe and significant cases. If these were out on the street, we would expect enormous penalties to be placed on them. These are not generally for petty matters. And so what we see is that victims are, when they're empowered, they want to see justice done, and they demand protection. It's when they're not supported and the statutory sector can then not always be as sensitive as they could be and demand, because they've got other agendas like protecting children, make demands of them.
Okay. We've got to take a break.
Okay.
We will come back because I know that this is quite interesting. We're going to take a break. We'll be back straight after this break. Till then, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to the second part of Stigma. Just before the break, we were talking about services that are available to women who take the opportunity, picking up that phone and asking for help. Paula, I wanted to come to you and say, okay, fine, you've got services in place, and we've looked at and heard that there are faults within those services, and how they are being accessed, and whether the victims are actually getting the service that they need. What about women who don't leave the house, make the phone call, but don't leave the house, and actually say, we're too petrified or scared to take this forward? Are there services available for women in that situation? Because there might be a situation, and Inderpal probably knows of many victims who just pick up the phone just to offload and think, okay, fine, you know what, I've picked up the phone on this occasion. I want to do something, but I'm too petrified because of culture, because of added pressure, etc. I've taken, I know that I can go somewhere, but I can't. I haven't got the himmat is what we call in Punjabi. I haven't got the courage to actually take this forward. Are there services available for those who just make that one phone call, but then don't access anything else?
I think it would be very difficult for services to be able to act depending on the circumstances. If somebody's life was at risk, then services would have to think about maybe on occasion breaking confidentiality. But in the main, the domestic violence services provide a confidential service, and the idea is that you can keep calling, and that's the great encouragement. Is you've been brave, if you've been brave enough to make that first call, then we would hope that the service that you get, the domestic violence helpline, whichever the domestic violence services it is, would be the ones that try to make that connection, try to recognise that we need to build up the confidence of people to know that we can keep them safe and that we will keep them safe.
So in terms of that service, so the woman picks up the phone, you've got somebody on the end of the phone, and they're probably hearing a similar situation on a daily basis. 20, 30, 50, 100, whatever phone calls they get. How do they determine that this is going to be a fatality? How does that worker actually determine to break the confidentiality and therefore safeguard a potential fatality or homicide from happening?
They can't. Their breach of confidentiality would only go so far as safeguarding children or vulnerable adults within the household.
So women actually can't be safeguarded in domestic violence situations, really, can they?
Well, it depends how they access service. We can't reach in and see what happens behind closed doors. So we've got to work harder, I think, as a society, in order to be able to take those messages out everywhere through all our mediums of communication to try to reach those who are most isolated and say that you're not alone. The experience that you're having might feel like you're the only one experiencing this. This threat is you're the only one who's had this level of threat, but you're not. You know, this is an experience of too many women in this city. 25,000 women in this city will experience domestic violence this year. What we want to do is to reach out to all of those and say, you're not alone. This is a common experience. We know how to keep you safe. We will do our best to keep you safe, but you've got to come to us.
Inderpal, how can you encourage potential victims who are watching the programme to actually pick up that phone and have confidence, faith and himmat to actually, you know, take that first step?
I think for the viewers that are watching, and if anybody needs help, to pick up the phone, we are here to give you help and support, and we will be here to rehouse you, you know, and not to worry about finances, because we will support you in all of that. All I do is just encourage them to make that first step and pick up that phone, and make that referral to an agency so that they can help you get you out, and after that they will take care of the rest.
What about if a woman doesn't want to leave?
The situation. Well, what I would say is just try and keep yourself safe. The thing is, women, when they're in a domestic violence situation, they know how to keep themselves safe because they'll see the reoccurring pattern. And when they start to see the reoccurring pattern, they'll start to, you know, those are little triggers for them to know, and they'll be able to keep themselves and themselves and their children safe, because it's just their intuition knowing. Because sometimes, a lot of the time, I can't say all the time because that would just be out of blue, but a lot of the time the perpetrator, it's like a cycle, isn't it? So it will be first they might get hit, shouted, ranted. It might be that then you decide that you're going to leave, or you'll say you're going to leave, and then the persuasion will kick in, and then it'll be all right for 3 or 4 days, and then it'll carry on again. And like I said, I can't say that for everyone, but a lot of the time the cycle is like that. And when it is like that, the woman starts to pick up on that, and they have those little triggers that they can keep themselves safe. And what I do say is just keep yourself safe. If you don't want to pick up the phone, let a family member know who you can trust. If you allowed out to a doctor's appointment, you know, or a professional appointment for health visitors, come in, a housing officer, anybody who comes in externally, please try and disclose to them.
So, victims, do you think it is? How would you encourage a victim to actually get some help out of that situation?
I mean, there's a real difficulty with victimless prosecution. So the difficulty with calling the police is you might start the road to starting a prosecution off. If that's not necessarily what you want, what you've got to understand, the police are there for you. So just give them a call and say, I'm not safe, I'm in danger, I want this person removed. And just something as little as that can take you out of the situation for right then and there. It's not a long-term fix, but at least if you're in a dangerous situation, it will get you out of that dangerous situation.
But then is there going to be pressure on that person to then, you know, seek a prosecution? Because the police is obviously, you know, numbers game, got to get a prosecution. So it's all good and well to say to the victim, pick up the phone, tell the police that you're not safe. But then what happens as a result of that? Is she going to be forced into a prosecution, or can it be a situation as simple
I
as...
think the first point is you've got to weigh up a prosecution or your safety, your life. So if there's a choice between the two, it's your life, so you call the police. But I think it is a difficult situation because the reality of the situation is if the police officer attends, he can make a pocketbook entry, and that's evidence in court. He'll sign the bottom of it. He might get you to sign the bottom of it, and that's evidence in court. Anything that he's seen at that situation that can lead to a prosecution may lead to a prosecution. Until you give a statement, which you'll be asked to sign at the bottom, it'll have an extract at the bottom saying that you are willing to attend to court, and that's where the pressure's exerted. So I'd always encourage, if there's a situation like this, you have to play ball with the police because they are there to help you. But I think equally, you've got to, if you don't want to get yourself involved in the prosecution process and you are in danger, call the police definitely and just say, listen, I need this person removed from the house, and they will.
But can I just add to that though? You know, I do get that sense of women losing control through the criminal justice process. But there's also civil orders, you know, and I think for many women, what they want from the police might be immediate help and protection. And you're absolutely right. You've got to call the police if you're in danger and if you're at risk. But in the longer term, it might be that you just want something which says and something which tells your abuser, your partner, that they're not to harm you, or that they need you to be out of the house. And civil action can do that. It doesn't have penalties unless he breaches it, unless he continues to assault, or unless he comes to the house. And I think that's a really powerful.
You're talking about is a restraining order, but how
No, a
easy?
restraining order is what you receive after a criminal case. What we're actually referring to here is called a non-molestation order. You can go to a solicitor. Any high street solicitor should do it. Anyone that covers family law, and you go in, you can instruct them. Legal aid has been cut, but I think for non-molestation orders there should be, depending on your circumstances, there should be legal aid there in order to just safeguard yourself. I mean, they can draft them, preventing them access to your property, access to yourself, your children. So it's just something to look into.
Why is that service not publicised as well as a refuge or the helpline? Because that seems to be a service that's going to help a lot of the women who don't want to leave the house, who want to stay within that environment, but just want to give the person, the abuser, a message to say, back off, otherwise the next stage is going to be the police. Why is that service not something that people randomly know about?
We do need to advertise it more. I absolutely agree, and there are different ways in Birmingham of being able to get this kind of protection, not least through the police. The police themselves, when they're attending incidents now, are telling victims about what's called the National Centre
of Domestic Violence. I was just about to say that.
And you can do that.
For free.
You can do those over the phone, you know. And but what we would encourage is, if you are doing those over the phone, also connect to the domestic violence services, because it's not enough just to have a piece of paper. You do need to be able to get a bit of support behind it.
But why? Coming back to, and I know you've said, it should be advertised more, but why? That's a service that's available. There's a service that, you know, as you've rightly said, you're the lead in looking at services that are available. Why is that service being on the back burner? Why is that something that has not openly been, you know, told to the community? Look, you have got an alternative option if you don't want to, you know, go to a refuge, or if you don't want to, you know, take that step of a prosecution.
I think this is a challenge for all of the options around domestic violence, not just around non-molestation orders and civil orders. I think it is that we've got a range of different services which might suit people, you know, and that might be breaking the isolation, going to group work, talking on the phone line, getting help with the kids. All of these things which might be barriers are not widely known. We do our best, and we can always do better. But we do our best, and we do regular campaigns. We've got 4 domestic violence forums across the city, which loads of frontline services come to, 50, 70, you know, at a time. Frontline services from across children's services and housing services and the police and everybody, and libraries, and they try to get those messages out. But inevitably, we don't get them out to enough people, and we'd like to get them out to more as well.
Why do you think there is a difficulty?
I was going to say it's because I think non-molestation order and those kind of orders are legal remedies, and really you need to be seeing a solicitor to deal with that. I mean, obviously, these people that deal with domestic violence have got a high level of training, but they're not solicitors. It's a different type of remedy.
But then why are the solicitors?
Our domestic violence services, who do take, who do assist women to get their own, we call them DIY orders. They've had 100% success rate. So I think we shouldn't underestimate our domestic violence services. They're really good at getting these orders, because the courts
offered non-molestation orders, prohibitive steps orders. They're all offered to service users when they come through into the service, to say this is an extra way that you can be protected from the perpetrator. And like I said, like it was said, is that the National Centre of Domestic Violence, they're really great because you can get them within like 24 hours with those, and a lot of the time it's free. I can't say 100% because I recently had a case where somebody was employed and they didn't get it for free, but a lot of the time they do get it for free, and it is really quick.
We know that there's lots of pitfalls where it comes to domestic violence, and agencies don't always work together, although one would assume on paper that it's easy for health, education, social services, refugees, etc. to work together. And that's obviously because everybody's got their own targets and their own agendas. How difficult is it, do you think, for these services to actually come under one umbrella and really look at the needs of that victim, regardless of whether they walk through a refugee's door or they decide to stay at home? What are the pitfalls? What are the problems? What are the barriers?
Well, I think services have got a lot better at working together, and I think that's come over in recent years when services have been looking at to see who's at high risk of harm from domestic violence, and those services will come together in the city. We've got three what we call multi-agency risk assessment conferences, the MARACs. Forgive the jargon, but these come together on a bi-weekly basis across each of the quadrants of the city, and they look at those cases which are brought either from the police or from other agencies, and where the agencies consider that there may be a high risk, and they look to see how can we work together best in order to be able to protect the victim. And that victim at that time will also have a support worker from a DV service so that their voice is not lost amidst that. Because as we've heard, that women who are experiencing domestic violence are the best judges of their own risk. And we've got to listen. So I think things have really improved.
Actually, can I just mention something that's very important, that going back to the non-molestation orders, often women will call the police. There's been an incident at home. They're summoned up the courage to call the police. The police will look at it because most of the time it's the perpetrator and the victim are the only witnesses to the incident. So there's not enough evidence, so they'll no further action in the case and not take it any further. But I think the point is that you've got to not lose heart at that stage, because the civil remedies that we've already mentioned, in the criminal courts, it's beyond all reasonable doubt. So there's a very high level in terms of proof. But whereas in the civil courts, it's a lot lower. It's on the balance of probability. So it's much more likely that you're going to get the help in terms of the civil remedies, more likely than criminal.
Yeah.
Inderpal, what are the frustrations that services face? Because you often hear that budgets are being cut, and they're always cut at DV cases. Women aren't being seen as that first-class citizen or an equal citizen across the UK. What are the frustrations that services actually face?
A lot of frustrations around education, school, not understanding what a risk is. And you know what? You'd think that people would understand risk, what risk is, what risk area is, but it's really difficult. The reason I say that is because let's just talk about education at the minute. There's these new fines that come out if you don't go to school, for parents, and how they're all saying that education is really important, which I don't disagree with. Education is really important, but if there's a child and the mum is at risk in that area, I would be the first one to say, well, I'm sorry, I don't advise for you to take your child to that school. But you'll have head teachers say, well, no, we will be fining you. It is against the law. You need to take your child to school. So that can be really frustrating. But also getting children into school, which is really frustrating, because when they come into refuge, for example, the schools around in that area will know, because obviously we've got a partnership working with all those schools. And so what they'll do is they won't want to take the child because they don't want to open a can of worms, or they want the perfect attendance because they know that child might move on in 3 to 6 months. That's a big frustrating. Not having things done quick enough, I think, for the safety of the person. Even like I said, I work in refuge, but I work in the community as well. So there are some people that have decided to stay in their properties who have got orders out. But I mean, to get safety put into place into their own homes, the frustration of that, getting it really done quicker. I think not getting things done fast enough can be really frustrating, and not people not understanding the risk factor. And I think when there's children involved, the risk can be really high, because obviously it's that impact on that child as well as the victim.
Well, I have to come back to you, because earlier on you'd said that when you're looking at service needs, you do listen to agencies, but from what Inderpal's describing, it doesn't seem that agencies' views, their experience, and their thoughts are being heard, because if they were being heard, that you wouldn't be hearing things like things are not being done quickly enough, education isn't playing ball. We have issues around funding, we have issues, with refugees closing, etc. Is the council really doing anything about DV and services available?
Well, there's no refugees closing in this city. I think what we can see from Birmingham is it's absolutely bucked the national trend. Whereas we've seen refugees crossing with the austerity cuts across the country, Birmingham has not only maintained the refuge provision in the city, it's grown it. And it's also strengthened funding for outreach services, for helpline, for group work, for specialist services for LGBT lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans victims. And so Birmingham is utterly committed to domestic violence and to the importance of domestic violence specialist provision, which doesn't lie in the City Council, it lies in our voluntary services who understand domestic violence. So that's as far as trying to maintain, in a very difficult environment, trying to maintain those services. And I've sat with the City Council for a very long time, and I'm really pleased with this administration and how it's prioritised domestic violence. There is a long way to go to get all of our services working to understand domestic violence across the statutory sector. We've got a long way to go.
And what's the council doing about it?
Well,
very quickly, 30 seconds, because we're running out of time.
We are just about, over the summer, entering a service review of all of it. We're throwing it all up in the air and saying, right, what is it as a city that we need to be doing and what that we need to be doing better? And we will be coming out and asking people exactly these questions about what it is that we need to do better.
Inderpal, final words on services. What would you say to potential victim?
I'd say, please pick up that phone. Anybody who's going through domestic violence, please pick up that phone just to make that one call, and we'll deal with the rest.
Tom?
I'd say prosecution is something you've got to consider, but your safety is paramount, so call the police, forget about things like prosecution. They're things that you can deal with at a later stage.
Thank you, ladies. As we come to the end of another topic on domestic abuse, we've looked at services. As you've heard, there are plenty of services that are available. It takes you 2 minutes, less than that really, to pick the phone up. There is help available. And as Sarb said earlier, your safety is paramount, and the safety of your children is really paramount. We know that the services are not perfect, but we don't live in a perfect world. Utilise the services, because if you don't utilise the services, they will get cut. Because the argument is going to be, well, we haven't got the need for them, so let's use that money elsewhere. We know that domestic abuse is a big problem. Like I said earlier, 1 woman in every minute is killed around the world as a result of domestic abuse. And in the UK, it's 2 women a week. We need to bring that figure down so that there is no more women who are killed as a result of domestic abuse. And that is something that all of us have to work together. So if you are a victim of domestic abuse, please pick up that phone and get in contact with a service close to you. Till next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.